The rain descended that Tuesday afternoon in unrelenting sheets, transforming Fifth Avenue into a chaotic ballet of tilting umbrellas and the impatient blare of taxi horns. Marcus Ashford, a man accustomed to commanding the city's skyline, found himself momentarily captive beneath the awning of his beloved coffee shop. He watched the urban tempest unfold. His chauffeur, a loyal if slightly exasperated man named Jenkins, circling the block for what felt like the dozenth time. Marcus briefly retreated further into the cafe's alcove, dodging the persistent inquiries of a particularly tenacious journalist, one who'd been hounding him incessantly about his latest acquisition, a grand old building in Brooklyn. Preservationists, their voices amplified by social media, were fighting tooth and nail to save the historic landmark, while eager developers, fueled by Marcus's ambition, were itching to tear it down and erect another glass and steel testament to progress. At 38, Marcus had carved out an empire that glittered with a net worth exceeding $3 billion. Yet, lately, each triumph tasted like ash in his mouth, each victory a hollow echo. 6 months. A mere 6 months had passed since the ink had dried on the divorce papers, since Victoria, his wife, his confidant, his equal, had silently and deliberately walked out of their opulent penthouse, taking with her only her most personal belongings and an unshakable sense of pride. She'd steadfastly refused his generous settlement offer, turned down the keys to the lavish Tribeca apartment, rejecting everything except the liberating embrace of her newfound freedom. The memory of her departure still seared in his mind, not with the white-hot rage he might have expected, but with a far more complex and unsettling tapestry of emotions. Regret, longing, a haunting sense of unfinished business. Marcus glanced at his wrist, the polished face of a vintage Patek Philippe gleaming faintly in the dim light. The watch, a cherished heirloom, had belonged to his grandfather, a man who'd navigated life's storms with an unwavering sense of purpose. Deciding he couldn't delay any longer, Marcus steeled himself for a dash through the downpour. The rain was beginning to relent slightly, and he had a crucial meeting scheduled for 4 o'clock, one he couldn't afford to miss. He ventured out onto the wet sidewalk, nearly colliding with a woman who was struggling to wrestle open a stubborn umbrella while precariously balancing 2 overflowing grocery bags. "I'm so sorry," he began, instinctively reaching out to steady the teetering bags, his voice laced with genuine concern. Then he froze, his words caught in his throat like a sudden obstruction. The woman looked up, her eyes, the warm hue of liquid honey, widening in a mixture of recognition and what looked suspiciously like fear. Victoria, his ex-wife, but not quite the Victoria he remembered. Not the confident, radiant woman who had once effortlessly commanded every room she entered. This woman possessed the same delicate features, the same familiar way of tucking a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear when she felt nervous or flustered. But there was an undeniable and profoundly significant difference. She was pregnant. Very, very pregnant. Marcus felt the solid ground beneath his feet tilt precariously, his carefully constructed world threatening to crumble. His gaze dropped involuntarily to her rounded belly, clearly visible beneath the clinging fabric of her rain-dampened coat, then snapped back to her face, searching for answers he couldn't articulate. Victoria's cheeks flushed a delicate shade of crimson, and she took a reflexive step backward, nearly losing her grip on one of the overloaded bags. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the relentless roar of the city traffic. I didn't expect to see you here. You're pregnant." The words tumbled out of his mouth before he could censor them, flat and accusatory in a way he hadn't intended. Victoria's hand moved instinctively, protectively, to cradle her stomach. "Yes, how far along?" "That's really none of your business anymore." Her voice had suddenly found its strength, that familiar steeliness he'd both loved and, admittedly, occasionally hated during their tempestuous marriage. Marcus's mind was racing, performing calculations he didn't want to do, grappling with possibilities he desperately wanted to dismiss. They'd been divorced for 6 months, separated for 2 months prior to that. 8 months in total. If she was as far along as she appeared, 5, maybe 6 months, then the timeline defied logic. Except it didn't defy logic at all. It fit perfectly, devastatingly, into a small, irretrievable window of time. But that couldn't be right. Victoria was infertile. They'd endured 3 agonizing years trying desperately to conceive a child, 3 years of invasive specialists, endless tests, and emotionally draining treatments that had left them both feeling financially depleted and emotionally bankrupt. The diagnosis had been unequivocal. Severe endometriosis, damaged fallopian tubes, less than a 2% chance of natural conception. The doctors had gently recommended IVF, but after 2 rounds, costing them a king's ransom and nearly fracturing the remnants of their already fragile marriage, they'd reluctantly given up, accepting the crushing reality that parenthood might forever remain beyond their reach. The infertility had been the insidious beginning of the end of their once passionate relationship. Not because Marcus blamed Victoria, he'd never blamed her, not even for a moment, but because the immense weight of that shared loss had gradually crushed something fundamental between them, extinguishing the spark that had once defined their bond. They'd begun as lovers who couldn't keep their hands off each other, who laughed at private jokes and effortlessly finished each other's sentences. By the end, they were virtual strangers sharing an enormous bed, polite and careful in their interactions, but desperately and profoundly unhappy. "This is crazy," Marcus said, his voice rough, barely a whisper. "The doctors said you couldn't." "I know what the doctors said." Victoria shifted the weight of her grocery bags, her jaw set in that stubborn, infuriating way he remembered all too well. "I was there for every appointment, every test, every agonizing failure. I know exactly what they said." "Then how?" He gestured helplessly at her stomach, the question hanging heavy in the rain-soaked air. "Miracles happen, Marcus. Or maybe the doctors were wrong. Does it matter?" She looked pointedly past him, scanning the street, searching for an escape route. "I really need to go." "Wait." He instinctively reached for her arm, then thought better of it, pulling back his hand as if burned. "Victoria, please. If this baby is... if there's any chance." "There's no chance," she said sharply, cutting him off with the finality of a slamming door. "This baby has nothing to do with you." The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs and leaving him gasping for breath. Marcus felt something cold and heavy settle in his chest, a leaden weight of fear and uncertainty. "You're seeing someone." It wasn't a question. It was a reluctant statement of fact, a painful admission of the obvious. Victoria's expression immediately shifted, becoming guarded, wary, in a way that told him everything he needed to know, confirming his worst suspicions. Of course, she was seeing someone. She was beautiful, intelligent, kind, a woman any man would be fortunate to have. Why wouldn't she have moved on? 6 months was plenty of time to meet someone new, fall in love, start a family. The family she'd always wanted. The family she couldn't have with him. Except they hadn't divorced because they stopped loving each other. They'd divorced because the crushing weight of wanting something they couldn't have had poisoned everything else, contaminating the very foundation of their relationship. Marcus had suggested it after their second failed IVF attempt, during one of those careful, rational conversations they'd become so adept at having. They could adopt, he'd offered, trying to sound enthusiastic. They could use a surrogate. But Victoria had looked at him with tears streaming silently down her face and said she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't keep failing, couldn't keep disappointing him, couldn't keep living in the agonizing shadow of the children they'd never have. He'd let her go because he loved her, because watching her slowly break herself apart over something neither of them could control was infinitely more painful than losing her. Or so he told himself at 3 o'clock in the morning when he couldn't sleep alone in their enormous, eerily silent bed. "I'm happy for you," Marcus managed, forcing the words past the lump in his throat. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. "Really? I hope everything goes well." Victoria's expression softened slightly, a flicker of something akin to pity crossing her features. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say. Will you tell me if you need anything? Not money," he added quickly when her eyes flashed with that familiar spark of defiance. "I know you don't want that, but if there's anything else, please." She studied him for a long, agonizing moment, and Marcus wondered what she saw reflected in his eyes. Did she see the man she'd once loved with every fiber of her being? Or just a painful reminder of everything they'd lost, of the dreams that had withered and died? Did she think about their marriage at all? Or had she carefully packed those memories away in a sealed box labeled mistake, and moved on with her life, leaving him behind in the wreckage? "I should go," Victoria said finally, breaking the suffocating silence. "Take care of yourself, Marcus." She turned and walked away without looking back, her pregnant silhouette quickly disappearing into the anonymous crowd of afternoon shoppers and weary office workers hurrying home to their families. Marcus stood frozen on the wet sidewalk, the rain beginning to fall harder again, soaking through the expensive fabric of his suit jacket, chilling him to the bone. His phone buzzed insistently, his assistant, the ever-efficient Sarah, reminding him about the crucial 4 o'clock meeting. He texted back a curt reply, informing her that something had come up, that he needed to reschedule, then flagged down a passing taxi. He rattled off his address to the driver and sank back into the plush leather seat, staring unseeingly out the window as the dazzling lights of Manhattan blurred past. A kaleidoscope of indifference. Victoria was pregnant. After years of being told it was an impossibility, after their marriage had crumbled under the immense weight of that heartbreaking impossibility, she was going to have a baby with someone else. The timing gnawed at him, a persistent, irritating itch he couldn't scratch. 6 months pregnant, maybe, which meant she'd gotten pregnant right around the time of the divorce, maybe even before. Had she been seeing this other man while they were still married? Had she deliberately lied about the infertility, manipulating him with false hope? No, that was paranoid and cruel, a betrayal of everything he knew about her character. Victoria wasn't a liar. She'd been genuinely devastated by their inability to conceive, had blamed herself relentlessly, even when he'd told her 1,000 times that it wasn't her fault. But then, how? How was this even remotely possible? Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his extensive list of contacts until he found Dr. Patricia Morrison, the renowned fertility specialist who had treated them for so long. He started to dial, then hesitated, his finger hovering over the screen. What was he going to say? *, my ex-wife is mysteriously pregnant. Please explain. *, it was none of his business anymore. Victoria had made that abundantly clear. This baby had nothing to do with him. Except, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that it had everything to do with him, that he was inextricably bound to this unfolding drama in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The taxi pulled up to his imposing building, its mirrored facade reflecting the darkening sky. Marcus paid the driver without really registering the amount and rode the elevator to his penthouse in strained silence, nodding absently at his ever-present doorman, who had witnessed the rise and fall of his marriage with quiet, knowing eyes. Inside, the vast apartment felt cavernous and unsettlingly empty. Victoria's touches were long gone, erased as if she'd never existed within those walls. The colorful throw pillows that had once brightened the living room, the flourishing plants she'd lovingly tended, the framed photographs of their travels together, all vanished without a trace. He'd redecorated in a style he'd mistakenly believed would bring him peace, a sleek, modern minimalism that was as cold and unforgiving as it was stylish. Everything was shades of gray and chrome, meticulously placed and perfectly tasteful. It looked like a high-end hotel suite, impersonal and devoid of warmth. Marcus poured himself a generous measure of scotch, neat, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the twinkling expanse of the city. Somewhere out there, in the vast urban sprawl, Victoria was probably arriving home, putting away her groceries, maybe talking to her new boyfriend about the awkward encounter with her ex-husband, maybe laughing about it, or maybe not laughing at all, her face etched with the same confusion and apprehension he felt. He thought about the look on her face when she'd first seen him, that fleeting moment of vulnerability before she'd erected her defenses. Not just surprise, but fear, and the way her hand had moved protectively to her stomach, as if shielding the baby from him. From what? What did she think he would do? Unless there was something she wasn't telling him, a crucial piece of the puzzle she was deliberately withholding, something about this pregnancy that she didn't want him to know. Marcus drained his scotch in a single gulp, the fiery liquid burning a path down his throat, and made a decision. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to start, regardless of the consequences. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring up at the ceiling, watching the play of headlights from the street below create shifting patterns across the white expanse. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Victoria's face, the lingering fear, the palpable defensiveness, the way she'd instinctively protected her belly as if he were a threat, a danger to her and her unborn child. At 6 o'clock in the morning, he gave up on the futile pursuit of sleep and went to his home office, a sanctuary of order and control that offered little comfort. He had files stored there in a locked cabinet, remnants of a life he'd tried desperately to leave behind, documents he'd never quite gotten around to clearing out, medical records from their agonizing fertility treatments. He pulled them out now, spreading them across his expansive mahogany desk, his eyes scanning the pages, forcing himself to revisit the reports he'd tried so hard to forget. Dr. Morrison's notes were meticulously thorough and clinically detached. Severe endometriosis, bilateral tubal damage, multiple failed ovulation induction cycles, 2 failed IVF attempts. The prognosis had been clear and unambiguous. Natural conception was highly unlikely, a statistical anomaly, and even with assisted reproductive technology, their chances were poor, bordering on non-existent. Victoria's condition was chronic and progressive, a relentless enemy attacking her reproductive system. The doctor had gently recommended moving on to donor eggs or surrogacy, options they had both found ethically and emotionally challenging. Marcus remembered that conversation vividly. It had taken place in Dr. Morrison's sterile office on a gray February morning almost 2 years ago, a day that was forever etched in his memory. Victoria had sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face a mask of stoic composure while the doctor delivered the devastating news. Afterward, in the hushed interior of the car, she'd finally broken down, sobbing uncontrollably, her body racked with grief, making herself physically sick. Marcus had held her while she cried, feeling utterly helpless and consumed by a burning fury at a situation neither of them could control, a cruel twist of fate that had stolen their dreams. They tried IVF anyway, twice, driven by a desperate hope that defied logic. Both times, Victoria had endured weeks of painful hormone injections that left her bloated, nauseous, and emotionally volatile. Both times, they'd waited with bated breath, clinging to the desperate hope that the pregnancy test would finally come back positive, a beacon of light in their ever-darkening world. Both times, it had been brutally, devastatingly negative, crushing their spirits and pushing their marriage further to the brink. The second devastating failure had happened 14 months ago, a pivotal moment that had irrevocably altered the course of their lives. A week later, Victoria had quietly moved into the guest room, a silent declaration of defeat. 2 months after that, Marcus had reluctantly suggested the divorce, initiating the painful process of dismantling their shared life. He picked up his phone and dialed Dr. Morrison's office, leaving a terse message with the answering service, requesting an urgent callback. Then he showered, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and went through the familiar motions of his morning routine. Though nothing felt real, nothing felt right. At 9 o'clock, his assistant called to confirm his rescheduled meetings, her voice betraying a hint of curiosity. At 9:30, Dr. Morrison finally called back, her voice as warm and reassuring as he remembered. "Marcus, I was surprised to get your message," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "How are you doing? I need to ask you something about Victoria's condition," he said without preamble, cutting through the pleasantries. "Is there any way the diagnosis could have been wrong? Any chance she could have conceived naturally?" There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line. "Has something happened? I saw her yesterday. She's pregnant. Very pregnant. I'd estimate 5 or 6 months along." Another pause, longer this time. "That's unexpected, but not entirely impossible. Medical diagnoses aren't absolute, Marcus. There's always a margin of error, however small, and the human body can be unpredictable. I've seen cases where—" "What's the probability?" he interrupted, his voice sharp with impatience. Realistically, based on Victoria's specific case, less than 1% for natural conception, but that's not zero. Spontaneous pregnancy in women with severe endometriosis does occur, though it's extremely rare. Sometimes the condition improves on its own, sometimes stress reduction plays a role, sometimes we simply don't understand why it happens. Could the chronic stress of their turbulent marriage have been preventing it? Could the divorce, the release from that suffocating pressure, have somehow made it possible? Dr. Morrison finished gently, her voice laced with a note of caution. It's a theory. Chronic stress does impact fertility. But I don't want to give you false hope or false guilt, Marcus. If Victoria is pregnant, it could be natural conception, or it could be that she pursued IVF with another clinic or used donor eggs or any number of scenarios. Have you asked her? She says the baby isn't mine. Then perhaps you should respect that, Marcus. Marcus ended the call feeling no better than before, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions and unanswerable questions. He tried to focus on work. He had a conference call scheduled about the Brooklyn development at 11 o'clock, but his mind kept wandering, replaying the encounter with Victoria, analyzing her every word, every gesture. Finally, at noon, driven by an insatiable need for answers, he did something he wasn't proud of, something that violated his own moral code. He called his head of security, a former detective named Robert Chen, a man who knew how to get information discreetly and efficiently. Robert, I need you to look into something for me, Marcus said, lowering his voice. Of course, Mr. Ashford. What do you need? Information on my ex-wife, Victoria Ashford. She went back to her maiden name, Victoria Hart. Where she's living, where she's working, who she's been seeing. He paused, hating himself for the invasion of privacy, for the violation of trust. I need to know about the father of her baby. Understood. I'll have something for you by end of day. Marcus hung up and immediately felt sick with guilt and self-reproach. This was wrong. He was invading Victoria's privacy, crossing boundaries that had no business being crossed. But he desperately needed to know. The timing was too coincidental, the pregnancy too impossible. Something wasn't adding up, and he couldn't rest until he'd uncovered the truth, however painful it might be. The rest of the day dragged by in a blur of meetings and phone calls that Marcus barely registered. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a relentless loop of speculation and anxiety. At 6 o'clock, Robert Chun appeared at his office door with a tablet and a troubled expression, confirming his worst fears. That was fast, Marcus said, trying to sound nonchalant. The basic information was easy to find, Chun said carefully, his tone suggesting that there was more to the story. But there are some complications. Show me. Chun set the tablet on the desk, displaying a neatly organized dossier of information. Victoria is living in a modest apartment in Brooklyn. She's been working as a freelance grant writer, primarily for nonprofit organizations. Financial records show she's been living very simply. No expensive purchases, no trips, no indication of support from a partner. What about the father? Chun hesitated, his expression tightening. That's the complication. There's no indication that she's been in a relationship. No social media presence showing a partner. No one entering or leaving her apartment regularly except for a neighbor who brings her groceries occasionally. An elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson. No credit card charges for romantic dinners out. No shared expenses. No evidence of anyone else being involved in her life. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, his heart pounding in his chest. That doesn't make sense. She's 6 months pregnant. Someone's the father. I contacted a few of her friends very carefully, posed as a journalist doing a piece on her nonprofit work. They all said the same thing. Victoria's been keeping to herself since the divorce. One friend mentioned she seemed different a few months ago. Said she was glowing and seemed happier, but Victoria wouldn't talk about why. Another said Victoria had mentioned something about a miracle, but wouldn't elaborate. A miracle? Marcus repeated slowly, the word hanging heavy in the air. Chun cleared his throat, his gaze unwavering. There's one more thing. I pulled her medical records. Don't ask me how. Marcus didn't need to ask. He knew Chen's capabilities, the lengths he would go to for a valued client. She's been seeing an obstetrician at Mount Sinai. According to the notes I could access, this is a healthy, natural pregnancy. No indication of IVF. No complications so far. The baby is due in approximately 12 weeks. Marcus did the math in his head, the implications sinking in like a stone. 12 weeks from now would put her at 9 months, which meant she was currently about 6 months along, which meant she'd gotten pregnant roughly 7 months ago. 7 months ago, we were still married, Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible. We were separated, but still legally married. Chun said nothing, but his expression was knowing, acknowledging the unspoken question. Is there anything else in those records? Any indication of paternity? No paternity test has been ordered, but Chun tapped the screen, bringing up a scanned document. This is from her first prenatal visit about 5 months ago. The intake form asks about the father's medical history. Victoria left it blank except for one section. Under how was conception achieved, she wrote, natural spontaneous pregnancy after years of infertility. Marcus stared at the words until they blurred, his mind reeling from the implications. Spontaneous pregnancy, years of infertility. She was talking about their infertility, about the agonizing years they'd spent trying to conceive, the shared pain and disappointment that had ultimately torn them apart. Mr. Ashford, Chun said carefully, breaking the stunned silence. Is there any possibility this child is yours? We were separated, Marcus said, but his mind was racing back to 7 months ago, to that fateful night in February. They'd been living in the same apartment still, though barely speaking, existing in a state of tense, strained truce. The divorce papers had been drawn up, but not yet filed, lingering on his desk like a final sentence. They'd been trying to figure out how to divide their lives, an emotionally exhausting and heartbreaking process. And then, one night, Victoria had come home late from a friend's birthday party. She'd been drinking, not drunk, but loose and sad and achingly beautiful in a way that had broken his heart. They'd started talking, really talking for the first time in months, about what had gone wrong, about what they'd lost, about how much they'd loved each other before everything fell apart, before the weight of their shared infertility had suffocated their passion. One thing had led to another, a desperate and inevitable chain of events. They'd ended up in bed together, a night of raw, unguarded emotion, tender and desperate and unbearably sad all at once. In the morning, Victoria had been gone, vanished without a trace. She'd left a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter, saying it had been a mistake, that it couldn't happen again, that they needed to move forward with the divorce, that they couldn't cling to the past. A week later, she'd moved out completely, severing the last remaining ties that bound them together. Marcus had tried not to think about that night, dismissing it as a fleeting moment of weakness, a final goodbye, a last desperate attempt to recapture what they'd lost before they became strangers. But now, Jesus, he whispered, his voice trembling, could be mine. What do you want me to do? Chun asked, his expression unreadable. Marcus stood up abruptly, grabbing his coat, his hands shaking. Nothing. This is done. Delete whatever files you made. Forget I asked. Sir. I mean it, Robert. This stays between us, and it ends here. Chun nodded slowly, his loyalty unwavering, and left the office, leaving Marcus alone with his churning thoughts and racing heart. If there was even a sliver of a chance that this baby was his, he needed to talk to Victoria, to confront her with the truth, but she'd been so adamant that it wasn't, had insisted that it had nothing to do with him. Why would she lie? Unless she didn't know, unless she'd been with someone else too, and mistakenly assumed the baby belonged to the other man. Or unless she knew perfectly well that the baby was Marcus and she was desperately trying to protect it from him, from the life he led, from the scrutiny of the public eye, from being the child of a billionaire who was constantly in the headlines. Or maybe she just didn't want him back in her life at all, and was willing to lie to keep him away. Marcus grabbed his keys and headed for the elevator, his mind made up. He had Victoria's address now, thanks to Chen's skillful snooping. He would go to her apartment, confront her, and demand the truth. Whatever it was, he could handle it. He had to know, for his own sanity, for the sake of this unborn child. The drive to Brooklyn took 40 minutes in the snarled evening traffic, Each red light an agonizing delay. Marcus parked illegally on Victoria's quiet street. His expensive car a jarring presence amidst the modest buildings. He sat in his car for a few minutes, composing himself, trying to figure out what to say, how to approach her without scaring her away. Finally, steeling his nerves, he got out of the car and walked towards her building. A pre-war walk-up with a slightly shabby entrance. A world away from the polished glass and steel towers he inhabited. He found her name on the buzzer and pressed it, holding his breath. No answer. He tried again, pressing the button repeatedly. Still nothing. She's not home. The voice came from behind him, startling him. Marcus turned to see an elderly woman with a shopping cart watching him with sharp, suspicious eyes. And if you're here to bother her, you can just leave now. She doesn't need any more trouble. I'm not here to bother her, Marcus said, his voice pleading. I'm her. I'm a friend. Do you know when she'll be back? The woman, Mrs. Patterson, he guessed, looked him up and down, taking in his expensive suit and watch, assessing him with a critical gaze. Friend? Huh? Funny. She's never mentioned you. And she's been very careful about who she lets into her life these days. My name is Marcus Ashford. I'm her ex-husband. Recognition flickered in the woman's eyes, followed by something that looked suspiciously like anger. Oh, you're the one who broke her heart. The words stung more than they should have, a painful reminder of his failures. Is she okay? Please, I just need to know she's all right. Mrs. Patterson studied him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. Finally, she said, She's at the hospital, Mount Sinai. She went into early labor this afternoon. Marcus' heart stopped, the world around him fading into a blurry haze. Early labor? But she's only 6 months. 28 weeks, Mrs. Patterson said sharply, correcting him. The baby's too early. They called an ambulance around 3 o'clock. I wanted to go with her, but she insisted she'd be fine alone. The elderly woman's voice cracked slightly. That girl is always alone, always insisting she's fine when she's clearly not. Marcus was already moving toward his car, his mind reeling with terror. Which entrance? Emergency? Labor and delivery? 5th floor, Mrs. Patterson called after him. And you tell her Doris is coming as soon as my daughter can drive me there. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur of honking horns and flashing red lights that Marcus barely registered. His mind was stuck on one terrifying fact. 28 weeks was dangerously premature. Babies could survive at that gestation, but they faced serious complications. A battle for life that was often fraught with peril. Respiratory problems, developmental delays, weeks or even months in the sterile, isolating environment of the NICU. Victoria must be terrified, alone and vulnerable, facing this crisis without him. He abandoned his car with the valet at Mount Sinai's main entrance, tossing him the keys without a word, and ran towards the elevators, his heart pounding in his chest. The 5th floor was quieter than he expected. A hushed sanctuary of muted colors, soft lighting, and the antiseptic smell that all hospitals shared, a stark reminder of mortality. He approached the nurse's station, trying to catch his breath. I'm looking for Victoria Hart, he said, his voice strained. She was brought in this afternoon in premature labor. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, checked her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Are you family? I'm her husband. The lie came automatically, a reflex honed by years of habit, and he didn't bother to correct it. Is she okay? Is the baby? She's stable. The doctors managed to stop the contractions with medication. Miss Hart is on bed rest and being monitored closely. The nurse studied him more carefully, her gaze penetrating. She didn't have you listed as an emergency contact. She actually didn't list anyone. We're separated, Marcus admitted, his voice barely a whisper. It's complicated, but please, I need to see her, even if it's just for a moment. The nurse's expression softened, a flicker of sympathy crossing her face. Room 517. But if she asks you to leave, you leave. Stress is the last thing she needs right now. Marcus found the room with shaking hands, his stomach twisting with anxiety. The door was partially open, and he could see Victoria in the bed, propped up on pillows, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She looked small and exhausted, dark circles etched beneath her eyes, her face pale and drawn, and 4 ran into her arm, and she was connected to multiple monitors that beeped softly, charting the rhythm of her heart and the baby's. He knocked gently on the door frame, announcing his presence. Victoria's eyes flew open, and when she saw him, her expression went through a rapid series of changes, a kaleidoscope of emotions he couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, fear, anger, and finally a weary resignation. "How did you know I was here?" Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with exhaustion. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson." Marcus took a hesitant step into the room, his heart aching at the sight of her. "She said you went into early labor, Victoria. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Is the baby?" "We're both fine." The contractions stopped. "I'm on medication and strict bed rest." She looked away from him, avoiding his gaze. "You shouldn't be here, Marcus." "I know, but I couldn't stay away. Not when I heard you were in the hospital. Not when I knew you were facing this alone." He moved closer, pulling up a chair beside her bed, his eyes searching her face. "Victoria, we need to talk about the baby, about the timing, about everything." "There's nothing to talk about." Her voice was firm, resolute, shutting him down. 7 months ago, Marcus said quietly, ignoring her protest. "February. One night before you moved out. Do you remember?" Victoria's face went pale, her eyes widening with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. That was a mistake, a moment of weakness. Surely it didn't signify anything, did it? Because if her calculations were correct, the timeline coincided perfectly. This baby, unbelievably, could be his. "Could be isn't?" Victoria stated, but her voice trembled, betraying her uncertainty. "I told you. You said it had nothing to do with me. But I didn't say it wasn't yours." Marcus leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Look at me, Victoria. Tell me the truth. Is this my child?" For what felt like an eternity, Victoria remained silent. Then, to Marcus' utter shock, tears began to stream down her face, tracing paths through her carefully applied makeup. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I just don't know." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and fraught with unspoken emotions. Marcus felt as if he'd been physically punched, the breath knocked out of him. "What do you mean you don't know? How can you not know?" Victoria angrily wiped at her tears, smudging her mascara. "After you suggested the divorce, after I moved into the guest room, I was just so angry. Angry at you, at myself, at God, at the universe, at whoever decided I couldn't have children. I started going out more, trying to convince myself I could build a life without you, without the family we'd always dreamed of." She paused, taking a shaky breath to compose herself. "I met someone, a doctor, at one of the charity fundraisers I was helping to organize. His name was David. We went on a few dates. He was kind, funny, and completely oblivious to my medical history, my infertility struggles, my failed marriage. He was uncomplicated." Marcus felt a surge of jealousy, sharp and bitter, twisting in his gut. The image of Victoria with another man burned in his mind. "You slept with him once, maybe 2 weeks after that night with you," Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "We went back to his place after dinner, and I remember thinking, maybe this is what moving on feels like. But afterwards, I felt nothing. No connection, no spark, just emptiness." She looked at Marcus, her eyes red and swollen. "I told him I wasn't ready for a relationship, and we went our separate ways. Then, a few weeks later, I missed my period. And you assumed the baby was his." "I assumed it was impossible." Victoria corrected him gently. "I took 3 pregnancy tests before I even allowed myself to believe it. Then I went to the doctor and she confirmed it. A miracle, she called it. One of those inexplicable cases where the body heals itself, or the diagnosis was incomplete, or the stars align in just the right way." She let out a bitter laugh, devoid of humor. I tried to contact David to tell him, but his phone number was disconnected. The hospital where he supposedly worked had no record of a doctor by that name. I did some digging and realized he'd lied about almost everything. I don't even know if David was his real name. Marcus stared at her, stunned. He was married, probably. Or maybe he just didn't want the complications. Either way, he disappeared. Victoria's hand moved protectively over her swollen belly, a subconscious gesture of love and defiance. So, I decided it didn't matter. This baby was mine. A miracle that had nothing to do with my failed marriage or some man who couldn't even give me his real name. I could do this alone. I would do this alone. But you weren't sure, Marcus said slowly, piecing together the fragments of her story. You weren't sure if the father was me or him. The timing was so close, and given your medical history, the odds of conceiving naturally even once seemed impossible. Twice in the same month. It just didn't seem possible. Victoria met his gaze, her eyes filled with a raw vulnerability. I convinced myself it had to be David's baby, because if it was yours, if it was mine, everything would get complicated. If it was yours, it would mean we'd created the child we'd wanted for so long. But only after we'd destroyed our marriage trying to have it. It would mean I'd have to come back to you, or we'd have to co-parent, or I'd spend the rest of my life tied to someone who'd seen me at my absolute lowest. Someone who'd watched me fail over and over again. Her voice broke, cracking under the weight of her emotional burden. I couldn't do it, Marcus. I couldn't face the possibility that this baby was ours when we were already over. Marcus felt tears burning in his own eyes, a testament to the depth of his regret and the enduring strength of his love for this woman. You didn't fail, Victoria. We failed, both of us. We let the infertility define us, consume us, instead of fighting through it together. You suggested the divorce because you were breaking apart inside, because every day I watched you blame yourself for something that wasn't your fault, and I didn't know how to make it stop. I thought letting you go would give you peace. He reached for her hand, hesitated for a fleeting moment, then took it anyway, his fingers wrapping around hers. I never stopped loving you, Victoria. Not for one single day. Victoria's tears flowed even harder, a release of pent-up sorrow and years of unspoken longing. Don't say that. It's true. The divorce was the biggest mistake of my life. And if there's even a chance this baby is ours. He stopped, his throat tightening with emotion. We need to know, Victoria. We need to find out. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What if it's not yours? What if it's David's? Whoever he really was. What if this baby comes from a lie? Then we'll figure it out. We'll deal with it together. But what if it is mine? What if this is the miracle we spent years praying for? And we almost missed it because we were too hurt, too proud to see it. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, offering her reassurance and unwavering support. Please, Victoria, let me be here. Let me help. At least until we know for sure. Before Victoria could respond, the door to the room opened and a doctor entered. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and a calm, authoritative presence. Ms. Hart, I'm Dr. Jennifer Walsh. I'm the perinatologist overseeing your care. She glanced at Marcus, her expression curious. And you are? Marcus Ashford. I'm Victoria's. He looked at Victoria, uncertain what label to apply to their complex relationship. He's the father, Victoria said quietly, her voice laced with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Possibly. We're not sure. Dr. Walsh's eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. I see. Well, Mr. Ashford, since you're here, you should know that Victoria and the baby are both stable for now. But this is a high-risk situation. 28 weeks is very early. We've administered corticosteroids to help mature the baby's lungs in case of premature delivery, and we're monitoring her closely for any signs of renewed labor. What caused it? Marcus asked, his voice filled with concern. The premature labor, could be any number of factors. Stress, physical exertion, or sometimes it just happens. Victoria mentioned she's been working long hours and hasn't been sleeping well. Dr. Walsh turned to Victoria, her tone firm but compassionate. You're going to need to be on complete bed rest. No work, minimal activity. You'll need help. Someone to cook, clean, run errands. Do you have family nearby? Victoria shook her head, her expression tinged with sadness. My parents are in California. My sister is in Seattle. I've been managing on my own. That ends now, Dr. Walsh said firmly, brooking no argument. For the next several weeks, until we get you to at least 34 weeks, you cannot be alone. The stress of trying to manage everything by yourself could trigger labor again. She can stay with me, Marcus said immediately, without a moment's hesitation. I have plenty of space, and I can arrange for whatever help she needs. Nurses, a chef, whatever it takes. Marcus, no. Victoria, please, let me do this for you, for the baby. Let me help. He looked at her intently, his eyes pleading with her to accept his offer. Victoria looked between Marcus and Dr. Walsh, clearly torn between her desire for independence and the undeniable need for support. Finally, she closed her eyes and nodded once, a tiny movement that felt like surrender. Okay. But just until the baby comes. And we're getting a paternity test. Absolutely, Marcus agreed, his voice filled with relief. Whatever you want, as long as you and the baby are safe. Dr. Walsh made notes on her tablet, her expression softening slightly. Good. I want to keep you here for observation for another 48 hours. If everything remains stable, you can be discharged to home bed rest. Mr. Ashford, I suggest you use that time to prepare accommodations for Ms. Hart. She'll need a comfortable space on the main floor if possible. Stairs are discouraged, and I'll have the nursing staff give you a list of warning signs to watch for. After the doctor left the room, Marcus and Victoria sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of the information and the implications of the decisions they had just made. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice laced with exhaustion. This is crazy. 2 days ago I was alone and fine with it. Now you're moving me into your penthouse, and we're waiting to find out if you're the father of my baby. Not crazy, Marcus said softly, reaching out to gently stroke her cheek. Just unexpected, like this whole pregnancy. He stood, still holding her hand, his gaze fixed on hers. I'm going to take care of everything, Victoria. You just rest. Focus on staying healthy and keeping that baby inside for as long as possible. What if the test says you're not the father? Victoria asked, and Marcus could hear the fear and uncertainty in her voice. What happens then? Marcus looked at her for a long moment, at this woman he had loved and lost and never stopped thinking about, at the gentle curve of her belly where a baby, maybe his baby, was fighting to grow strong enough to face the world. Then I'll help you anyway, he said simply, his voice filled with unwavering resolve. Because whether this baby is biologically mine or not, you're still someone I care about, someone I never should have let go. And that baby deserves the best possible start in life. He paused, taking a deep breath. But, Victoria, I think we both know the truth. I think we've known it all along. Victoria's tears started again, but this time she didn't pull her hand away. She held on tight, like someone who had been drowning and had finally found something solid to cling to. 2 days later, Marcus' driver pulled up to the hospital entrance with a wheelchair already arranged. Victoria had protested that she could walk perfectly fine, but Dr. Walsh had been adamant. Every precaution mattered now. The penthouse had been transformed. Marcus had converted his spacious home office on the main floor into a temporary bedroom, complete with a hospital-grade bed that could be adjusted for comfort, a private bathroom, and enough monitors and medical equipment to rival the hospital. He had hired a private nurse named Caroline, a gentle woman in her 40s with decades of experience in high-risk pregnancies. The kitchen was now stocked with every nutritious food the nutritionist had recommended. His housekeeper, Maria, had been briefed on the situation and had promised to help with whatever Victoria needed. This is too much, Victoria said, her voice laced with disbelief as Marcus showed her around. She looked tiny and overwhelmed, one hand resting protectively on her belly as she took in the expensive equipment and pristine accommodations. It's exactly enough, Marcus countered, his voice firm but reassuring. Caroline will be here during the day. I'll be here at night. Maria can help with meals and anything else. All you have to do is rest and let that baby grow. What about your work? You can't just put your entire life on hold for me. Watch me, Marcus replied, guiding her gently towards the bed. I've moved all my meetings to video calls. Anything that requires my physical presence can wait. Right now, you and this baby are my only priority. Over the next week, they fell into an unexpected routine. Marcus worked from the dining room table, where he could hear if Victoria needed anything. Caroline monitored her vital signs and the baby's heartbeat several times a day. Victoria read, watched movies, and tried not to go stir-crazy from the enforced inactivity. And slowly, carefully, they began to talk. Not about the paternity test. That felt too charged, too dangerous, a potential landmine that could detonate and destroy the fragile peace they had tentatively established. Instead, they talked about smaller things, lighter things. Books they had read, shows they had watched, memories from their past. Victoria told him about her work with the nonprofits, the grant proposals she had written that had helped fund literacy programs and community gardens. Marcus told her about the Brooklyn development, and how he had decided to preserve the historic facade after all, creating affordable housing with character instead of another soulless glass tower. You're different, Victoria observed one evening. Marcus had brought her dinner on a tray salmon with roasted vegetables that Maria had prepared. He sat in the chair beside her bed while she ate, a ritual that had become their habit. How so? Marcus asked, curious. Softer, maybe. More present. Before, you were always thinking 3 steps ahead, always planning the next acquisition or deal. Now you're just here. Marcus considered this, reflecting on the changes that had occurred within him since their separation. Losing you changed me, Victoria. I realized I'd been so focused on building an empire that I'd forgotten what I was building it for. What's the point of having everything if you have no one to share it with? Victoria set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. Marcus, we need to talk about what happens after the baby comes. We can't keep avoiding it. Marcus knew she was right. He had been dreading this conversation, but he couldn't postpone it any longer. The elephant in the room was growing larger and more insistent. Have you thought about what you want? Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral. Honestly, I don't know. If the baby is yours, we'll have to figure out custody arrangements. Co-parenting. She paused, taking a deep breath. I'm not expecting us to just pick up where we left off. Why not? Victoria stared at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and hope. What? Why couldn't we pick up where we left off? Or better yet, start over completely? Do it right this time? Marcus leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. I know I hurt you, Victoria. I know I suggested the divorce when I should have fought harder for us. But Victoria, these past 2 weeks with you, they've been the happiest I've been in years. Not because of the baby, but because of you. Because I get to have breakfast with you and hear about your day and fall asleep knowing you're safe under the same roof. I don't want that to end. You're only saying this because I'm pregnant. I'm saying this because I never stopped loving you, Marcus said fiercely, his voice filled with raw emotion. The pregnancy just gave me an excuse to be near you again, to remember what we had before everything fell apart. And yes, if this baby is mine, I want to be a father. I want to be there for every feeding and diaper change and first word. But even if the test says I'm not the biological father, I still want you back. I still want us. Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks, a testament to the depth of her emotions and the vulnerability she felt in this moment. I'm scared, Marcus. What if we try again and it falls apart? What if the same problems come back? They won't, because we're different people now. We've both learned what it's like to lose each other. And I promise you, Victoria, I will never take you for granted again. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. But I'm not going to pressure you. We'll take this one day at a time. First, we get you and this baby safely to full term. Then, we figure out the paternity. Then, we decide what comes next. No rush. No expectations, just honesty and time. Victoria squeezed his hand, her gaze meeting his with a newfound hope. Okay, one day at a time. The days turned into weeks, each one a small victory in the battle against premature labor. Victoria reached 30 weeks, then 32. Each milestone was a small victory celebrated with careful optimism and a shared sense of relief. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing homemade soup and gossip from the Brooklyn neighborhood. Dr. Walsh continued to monitor Victoria closely, adjusting medications and ordering additional ultrasounds. The baby was growing well, defying the odds and proving to be a resilient little fighter. And through it all, Marcus and Victoria grew closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. They laughed together over silly television shows, shared intimate conversations about their hopes and fears, and argued playfully about baby names. Victoria liked traditional names that evoked a sense of history and timelessness, while Marcus preferred something more unique, something that reflected the extraordinary circumstances of the baby's conception and the miraculous nature of her existence. They held hands during the scary moments when Victoria felt a contraction, and they had to call Dr. Walsh to make sure everything was okay, their fear tempered by a shared sense of determination. At 34 weeks, Dr. Walsh gave them cautiously good news. You've made it past the critical period. If the baby comes now, the chances of complications are much lower. You still need to be careful, but we're in a much better position than we were 6 weeks ago. When can we do the paternity test? Victoria asked, her voice laced with a newfound urgency. She had been bringing it up more frequently, as if needing to know the truth before the baby arrived, as if knowing would somehow give her more control over the unpredictable future. We can do a non-invasive prenatal paternity test now, Dr. Walsh said. It just requires blood samples from both of you. Results take about a week. Are you both ready for that? Marcus looked at Victoria, his heart pounding in his chest. She looked back at him, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of fear and hope, anticipation and dread. Yes, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hand. We're ready. The blood draw was quick and painless, a simple medical procedure that held the power to irrevocably alter their lives. Then came the hardest part, waiting. 7 days that felt like 7 years, each hour stretching out into an eternity of uncertainty and speculation. Marcus tried to prepare himself for either outcome, mentally rehearsing the words he would say, the actions he would take, depending on the results. If the baby was his, he would be a father. The thought filled him with joy and terror in equal measure, a dizzying combination of elation and responsibility. If the baby wasn't his, he would, what? Walk away? He couldn't imagine doing that now. Victoria and this baby had become a part of his life again, and he didn't want to let them go, no matter what the test revealed. The results came on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Walsh called and asked them both to come to her office. Marcus helped Victoria into the car, his movements gentle and protective. She was enormous now, her body swollen and uncomfortable, her energy depleted. She was counting down the days until her due date, eager to finally meet the baby she had been carrying for so long. They rode in silence, both too nervous to speak, the unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air between them. Dr. Walsh's office was warm and wood-paneled, designed to be calming and reassuring, but the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. She gestured for them to sit and pulled up the results on her computer. Marcus felt Victoria's hand find his, her fingers gripping tight, seeking reassurance and strength. The test is conclusive, Dr. Walsh said, her voice calm but serious. Marcus, you are the biological father. Probability of paternity is 99. The world seemed to stop, the air sucked out of the room. Marcus heard Victoria make a small sound, a noise that was half sob, half laugh, a release of pent-up emotion. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, his mind reeling from the magnitude of the news. He was going to be a father. This baby that Victoria had been carrying, this miracle child that had survived against all odds, was his. Oh my God, Victoria whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Oh my God, Marcus, it's yours. The baby is yours. Marcus turned to her, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. Suddenly, they were both crying and laughing, holding each other as carefully as her pregnant belly would allow, their tears mingling in a shared expression of joy and relief. All the pain and loss and heartbreak of the past years seemed to crystallize into this one perfect moment of clarity, a testament to the enduring power of love and the miraculous nature of life. They had made this baby together during one night of desperate connection, one last attempt to salvage their broken marriage. And somehow, impossibly, it had survived when all the planned attempts had failed, a testament to the power of fate and the enduring strength of their bond. "We're having a baby," Marcus said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Victoria, we're having a baby." "I know," she sobbed, her tears flowing freely. "I can't believe it. After everything, after all those years of trying, it was always supposed to be you and me. This baby was just waiting for the right moment," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. Dr. Walsh discreetly left them alone for a few minutes, giving them the space they needed to process the life-altering news. When she returned, she was smiling, her expression conveying a sense of genuine happiness for the couple. "I have one more piece of news," she said, her voice gentle. "The ultrasound this morning showed the baby has moved into position. Given that you're at 36 weeks now and everything looks good, we could potentially schedule a C-section for next week if you'd like, or we can wait for natural labor. It's your choice." Marcus looked at Victoria, his gaze filled with love and respect. "What do you want?" Victoria thought for a moment, her eyes shining with a newfound confidence and serenity. Then she smiled, a real smile, bright and joyful in a way Marcus hadn't seen in years. "Let's wait. This baby has beaten every odd to get here. I think we should let them decide when they're ready to meet us." 4 days later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, Victoria woke Marcus with a gentle shake. "It's time," she said, her voice calm despite the obvious contraction that made her wince. "The baby's coming." The delivery was long and difficult, a grueling test of Victoria's physical and emotional strength. But she was strong, fueled by a deep-seated instinct to protect her child and a fierce determination to bring her safely into the world. Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, his heart swelling with love and admiration with every passing hour. And finally, at 2:47 p.m. on a sunny Thursday afternoon, their daughter came into the world. She was tiny, but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs that she demonstrated immediately, letting out a lusty cry that echoed through the delivery room. The doctors checked her over and declared her perfect, 7 pounds, 3 ounces of absolute miracle. When the nurse placed her in Victoria's arms, Marcus watched his ex-wife, his soon-to-be wife again if he had anything to say about it, cradle their daughter with tears streaming down her face, her expression radiating pure, unadulterated love. "She's perfect," Victoria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "She's absolutely perfect. She looks like you," Marcus said, touching one tiny hand, his voice choked with emotion. His daughter's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and he felt his heart crack open in a way he had never experienced before, a rush of overwhelming love and protectiveness. "What should we name her?" Victoria asked, her gaze meeting his with a shared sense of wonder. They had discussed names countless times over the past few months, but had never settled on one, as if they had been waiting to meet her first, to see what name fit her best. Marcus looked at his daughter, at her dark hair and tiny nose, and the way she seemed to already be studying the world with serious eyes, taking it all in with an intense curiosity. "Hope," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "Her name should be Hope, because she gave us hope when we'd lost it all. She's our miracle, our second chance." Victoria's tears fell harder, but she was smiling, her face radiant with joy. "Hope Victoria Ashford. It's perfect." 3 months later, Marcus and Victoria stood in a small ceremony room at City Hall, surrounded by a handful of close friends and Mrs. Patterson, who had insisted on being there, determined to witness the culmination of their extraordinary love story. Hope was asleep in her grandmother's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Victoria's mother had flown in from California and refused to leave her granddaughter's side, her eyes filled with love and adoration. "This is crazy," Victoria had said that morning as she had adjusted her simple white dress, her voice laced with nervous laughter. We're remarrying before we've even finished processing the first divorce emotionally. It's completely insane. Life's crazy, Marcus had replied, kissing her forehead and gazing into her eyes with unwavering love. But I'm not waiting another day to make you my wife again, Victoria. Not when I've already wasted too much time without you. Now, as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife for the second time, Marcus pulled Victoria close and kissed her with all the love and gratitude and wonder he had been holding in his heart for so long. They had lost each other once, allowing their fears and insecurities to drive them apart. But they had found their way back, guided by the enduring power of their love and the miraculous arrival of their daughter. And this time, they would build their life on stronger foundations, on honesty and communication, on mutual respect and unwavering support, and on the shared knowledge that some miracles were worth waiting for, that some love stories were destined to endure against all odds. Ready to go home? Marcus asked when they finally pulled apart, his voice filled with tenderness. Victoria looked at Hope, now awake and watching them with wide, curious eyes, her gaze following their every movement. Then she looked at Marcus, her smile radiant and full of promise. Yes, let's go home. They walked out of City Hall into the bright afternoon sunshine, a family bound not just by biology, but by choice, by a shared commitment to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. The future stretched before them, uncertain and beautiful and full of possibility, a vast expanse of uncharted territory to explore together, hand in hand. And for the first time in years, Marcus felt complete, his heart overflowing with joy and gratitude. He had finally found his way back to the woman he had always loved, the woman who had been his soulmate, his partner, his everything. He had learned that sometimes the greatest love stories weren't about finding someone new, but about finding your way back to the person you had never stopped loving, the person who knew you better than anyone else, the person who made you feel whole. And he had discovered that sometimes, against all odds and medical predictions, miracles happened when you least expected them, transforming your life in ways you could never have imagined. Marcus had found his ex-wife pregnant 6 months after their divorce, a twist of fate that had initially seemed like a cruel joke. But in doing so, he had found his way back to love, to family, to everything that truly mattered in life. The billionaire who had built an empire had discovered that his greatest treasure had been there all along, waiting for him to be brave enough to claim it, waiting for him to realize that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in love and family and the enduring bonds that connected them all. He had learned that the greatest success wasn't building a business, but building a life filled with love and laughter and the joy of watching his daughter grow, surrounded by the people who loved her most.